Hello everyone, this is Crypto BitLaw back with another blockchain legal, regulatory, and policy event update where we cover all of the new developments in the legal aspect of the digital asset space. And as you can see today, it's a pretty big news day. We have a bunch of different stories we're going to cover, namely $33.5 billion worth of Ethereum is trapped in a smart contract on the Ethereum blockchain. Quantum computers are about a decade away from cracking Bitcoin, according to researchers. Gemini has snagged a FINRA broker-dealer approval. DeFi money laundering increases, according to certain reports. Florida issues a warning over DeFi. The Biden infrastructure bill contains unconstitutional crypto surveillance provisions. The International Monetary Fund recently urged El Salvador to discontinue using Bitcoin as legal tender, and the New York State Senate recently confirmed a new top financial regulator. So we're going to be covering these issues for you today, and as always, if you guys enjoy this content, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel. We'd really appreciate that. You can also follow us on Twitter. We are at Crypto BitLaw. With that said, let's jump right into it. So first up on the docket, we can see that Cointelegraph reports that $33.5 billion worth of Ethereum is trapped in the largest Ethereum contract. They say the single largest Ethereum contract containing 8.6 million Ether worth about $33.5 billion is sitting idle because it cannot be spent or sent. A Twitter user highlighted the Beacon Chain contract, claiming it to be the largest Ethereum contract with billions of dollars worth of Ethereum trapped inside it. And here we can see the tweet that was pointed out, along with the contract address. If you'd like to follow this, the links are going to be down in the description below. It continues that the contract in question is an Ethereum 2.0 Beacon Chain staking contract launched in November of 2020. It cannot be spent without a hard fork. What makes this even more astonishing is the fact that the terms of the hard fork are yet to be decided, and people sending their ETH into the contract were all well aware of the fact. The terms of the hard fork could be decided once the Beacon Chain merges with the Ethereum mainnet. The Beacon Chain is the first key step in Ethereum's move from proof-of-work mining consensus to a proof-of-stake one. In order to become a validator in Ethereum 2.0, which was recently rebranded by the Ethereum team, but that's besides the point. But in order to become a validator in ETH 2.0, a trader must stake a minimum of 32 ETH. Thus, the $33.5 billion worth of ETH in the largest Beacon Chain contract shows the high demand and trust in the upcoming ETH 2 system. The merger of the Beacon Chain into the Ethereum mainnet would complete the transition to proof-of-stake ETH 2. The official Ethereum.org page for ETH 2 suggests the merger could be completed by Q1 or Q2 of 2022. And as a side point, I think we all know that that's not going to happen. I think, ETH 2 has been promised for, the past few years, and still it just kind of gets pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. But I think this is an interesting point to note with regards to this contract, that people just keep sending their ETH to this staking contract in anticipation of Ethereum 2.0 coming out, and they want to try to lock in these gains, but still, as the article noted, we have no real firm answer on when ETH 2.0 is actually going to come out. And in the meantime, all of these people's ETH, they're just locked in this contract, and in order to actually get it out, it's going to require a hard fork of the network, and we don't know when that's going to come. So I guess people have a lot of faith in this system. Personally, I really wouldn't be putting my ETH into that staking contract, but that's just me. So, interesting. Next up, we could see that Decrypt reported that researchers suggest that quantum computers are only about a decade away from cracking Bitcoin. They say Neven's law, not Moore's, gives quantum computers about 10 more years before they could ever crack the leading crypto. It continues, a quantum computing graduate student has calculated how large a quantum computer would need to be in order to crack Bitcoin's secure cryptographic algorithm. Mark Webber and his colleagues from the Ion Quantum Technology Group at the University of Sussex concluded that quantum computers need to be 1,000,000 times larger than they currently are before ever cracking Bitcoin's SHA-256 algorithm, an algorithm first published by the U.S. National Security Agency, the NSA, in the early 2000s. Conventional wisdom maintains that Bitcoin's encryption technology is so strong that attackers need to commandeer 51% of the combined computing power of the global Bitcoin network to compromise its, quote, immutable ledger. Every transaction on Bitcoin's ledger is assigned a cryptographic key, a random string of letters and numbers which is vulnerable for a finite length of time. Given enough computing power, or a powerful enough quantum computer, this key can be cracked. Weber estimates that if an attacker has a 10-minute window to crack the key, they would need a quantum computer with 1.9 billion qubits. If the key is vulnerable for 24 hours, this figure drops to 13 million qubits. Given that the largest superconducting quantum computer on the market is IBM's 127-qubit model, it doesn't look like the quantum computers pose much of a security threat to crypto. In traditional computing, Moore's law dictates that the number of transistors in a microchip doubles every 2 years, while the cost of the computers is halved. In essence, as time rolls on, we get more bang for less buck. In the world of quantum computing, this law has been replaced by Nevin's law, which dictates that the quantum computing's power undergoes a, quote, doubly exponential growth relative to conventional computing. To put that into perspective, doubly exponential growth would have given us laptops and smartphones back in 1975. So, if quantum computing hardware improves exponentially faster than regular transistor circuits, then theoretically it could one day eventually crack Bitcoin's code. It's just a question of when. Weber believes it might be possible in about a decade. So this brings up an interesting point, and it reminds me of situations that I've had where I was discussing Bitcoin with other individuals, people that were kind of hesitant to get into it. I remember talking about it with one attorney one time, and he said, "Oh, I'm not really sold on Bitcoin because quantum computers are going to eventually crack it." And I said, okay, well, that might be true. The SHA-256 encryption algorithm could be vulnerable to a quantum computer being able to have the necessary computing power to crack that encryption. But at the same time, when that becomes viable, when there's enough computing power to crack that, we're also going to have the advent of quantum-resistant encryption algorithms. So in a sense, there would be encryption algorithms that were designed to run on a quantum computer and effectively, render obsolete SHA-256, and these new quantum algorithms would be shored up against any sort of quantum attempt to break the encryption. So at that point, I think what would happen would be a hard fork of the Bitcoin network where the miners, instead of running the SHA-256 encryption algorithm for the proof of work consensus, they would adopt a new quantum-based encryption algorithm. So with this hard fork, the entire blockchain would pretty much be replicated, but all the miners that would be engaged in this fork would just agree that, hey, instead of using SHA-256, we're going to use this new quantum-resistant encryption algorithm. So that was my reply to that attorney's concern over Bitcoin and its possibility of being cracked by a quantum computer. And I think in the end he actually agreed with me on that. So I think that's an interesting point. If anybody ever brings this up, into discussion, you could just throw that case study at them and see what they have to say about that. Next, we could see that CoinDesk reported that the Winklevoss-owned Gemini Galactic Snags FINRA broker-dealer approval. This license could open up the future possibilities and opportunities around digital securities trading. They say Gemini Galactic Markets, part of the Winklevoss twins' crypto conglomerate Gemini, has been approved for FINRA, that's the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, membership, and with the ability to operate as a broker-dealer registered with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. The approval allows Gemini Galactic to operate as an alternative trading system, or an ATS, which will facilitate the trading of, quote, digital asset securities, said Gemini, adding that such assets are subject to U.S. securities laws, like traditional stocks and bonds, and therefore can only be bought and sold through a licensed broker-dealer. Gemini Galactic principal John Reinhardt said it remains to be seen exactly what kind of offerings digital asset securities will include. Quote, these securities will initially include private placements and, as the market matures, may include public offerings as well, Reinhardt said in an email to CoinDesk. Back in 2016 and 2017, tokenized securities and security tokens were all the rage. Believers said they would trade on regulated ATS venues and revolutionize existing market infrastructure. A couple of years on, it could be argued that the action has moved elsewhere, mostly around cryptocurrencies flowing on public blockchains and non-fungible token NFT applications. Quote, the growth of the digital asset securities market and the use of blockchains for securities infrastructure will depend on further clarity from regulators and additional investment by companies such as Gemini, said Reinhardt via email. He also stated that once there are real use cases, the market will be able to grow, and we are excited to be a pioneer in this space. Gemini initially made its broker-dealer application to self-regulatory body FINRA back in mid-2019. To date, the exchange, owned by Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss, has gathered an impressive clutch of licenses, approvals, and regulatory nods across its various trading and custody divisions. So I think that this is a really interesting development. The fact that Gemini was actually issued this broker-dealer status by FINRA is very bullish. I think ultimately what they're going to try to do is set up this alternative means for which to trade securities as tokenized assets on a blockchain, if you will. I know that recently there was an attempt to do this in the DeFi space by Do Kwon. He had a project, I forgot what the name of it was, but what it did, Mirror, that's what it was. It's the Mirror protocol. What it did is it mirrored underlying assets and it allowed you to trade them on the Terra blockchain. So, for example, if you wanted to trade Tesla stock, you could trade a tokenized version of that on Mirror and the price would follow the actual price of Tesla on the traditional markets, but you were trading it as a tokenized version on the blockchain. So that would be a DeFi-based implementation of this same principle, but I think it's really interesting to see that the Winklevoss or the Winklevi were actually granted approval to do this in a CeFi or TradFi manner. So I'm really interested to see what the future is going to hold for this in regards to tokenized security trading. Turning to this story, we can see that CoinDesk reported that money laundering picks up steam on DeFi protocols, according to a Chainalysis report. According to a new report from Chainalysis, cybercriminals laundered $8.6 billion in crypto last year, 17% of which went through DeFi protocols. They say money laundering through decentralized finance or DeFi protocols is gaining popularity with cybercriminals, according to new research from blockchain analytics firm Chainalysis. Cybercriminals laundered at least $8.6 billion in cryptocurrency in 2021, the firm said in research published Wednesday, a 30% jump in money laundering activity from 2020. Decentralized protocols received 17% of crypto sent by illicit addresses last year, up from a mere 2% in 2020. So that's a pretty big jump. Continuing on, they say, DeFi is not the only crypto-related money laundering method on the rise. Mining pools, high-risk exchanges, and mixers also received an increased amount of crypto from wallets tied to criminal activity last year. However, Chainalysis research suggests the largest group of crypto criminals still prefer to launder their money the old-fashioned way, through centralized exchanges. Centralized exchanges received nearly half of all crypto sent by cybercriminals in 2021. Nearly half of the $8.6 billion worth of crypto laundered went through centralized exchanges last year. Of that, 58% went to just 5 trading platforms, pointing to a growing concentration of services. They say, crypto obtained through theft, which is more technically challenging and more often taken up by organized groups, including North Korea-affiliated hacking groups, which stole $400 million in crypto last year, is substantially more likely to be laundered through DeFi protocols and mixers. Scammers, however, are more likely to use centralized exchanges, according to Chainalysis report. This may reflect scammers' relative lack of sophistication. So I think that this is an interesting story. I mean, it's no surprise that with the rise of DeFi and all of these different options and tools and technologies that are starting to proliferate through the DeFi space, it's only natural that you're going to see an increase in use case. And with anything, there's always going to be people that are engaging in nefarious or illegal activity. And I feel like it's just this particular sector is so prone to FUD through people like Elizabeth Warren, who just want to say that it's all about criminals and money laundering and any sort of nefarious activity, but still obfuscate the point that the majority of criminal activity funding surrounding that activity is actually, funded by cash, good old cold hard cash, untraceable cash. So we'll have to take this kind of with a grain of salt and then see how it shapes up. I think that there's probably only going to be an increase in this sort of activity. But I think one thing's for sure, and that's DeFi is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. It's like playing whack-a-mole. You can't shut down a smart contract when it exists on a decentralized blockchain. It's, analogous to these music industry executives trying to go after people sharing albums on BitTorrent. You could take down one node, but another one pops up and just to replace it. So next, we could see that Valkyrie applies to list Bitcoin miners ETF on NASDAQ. The Valkyrie Bitcoin miners ETF will invest at least 80% of its net assets in firms that derive at least 50% of their profit from Bitcoin mining. They say, crypto asset manager Valkyrie has applied to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, to list its exchange-traded fund, or ETF, offering exposure to stocks in Bitcoin mining and companies on NASDAQ. Following the SEC's reluctance to approve a spot Bitcoin ETF, asset managers and investment firms have turned to products offering exposure to the futures market or companies that are themselves exposed to Bitcoin in other ways, such as mining or holding crypto on their balance sheets. I guess one example of that would be MicroStrategy. Valkyrie's Miners ETF is similar in composition to one from Van Eck, which applied to the SEC to launch a digital asset mining fund in December of last year. The proposed fund will charge a management fee of 0.75% and incorporate both U.S. and non-U.S. companies, including some in emerging market countries as defined by the FTSE Emerging Index. So it's interesting to see this trend of more and more traditional securities, stocks, incorporating blockchain and blockchain-related assets. I know that the spot futures ETF was approved. Now we see this giant push to approve these miner-based ETFs, and I think it's all going to culminate in the Big Daddy ETF, the spot Bitcoin ETF. If you'd like to learn more about the spot Bitcoin ETF and the issues regarding regulation and approval for that, check out our ETF SEC on the spot video, linked in the description below, where we cover all of the issues regarding a spot Bitcoin ETF and the SEC's current reluctance to actually approve one. But I think once a spot Bitcoin ETF actually gets approval, it's going to be super, super bullish for Bitcoin. Next up, we can see there is a CoinDesk opinion piece that states that tucked inside the Biden infrastructure bill is unconstitutional crypto surveillance. And this was penned by this lady, Marta Belcher, who is a self-proclaimed cryptocurrency and civil liberties attorney. So let's see what she has to say. She says that Joe Biden recently signed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and then hidden within that was a cryptocurrency provision that amended part of the tax code. They say this provision alters Section 6050I of the tax code, which requires businesses that receive more than $10,000 in cash to collect identity details of the person paying in cash and report the transaction to the government. Failure to comply can be a felony punishable by up to 5 years in prison. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act expanded 6050I to include anyone who, in the course of conducting business, receives over $10,000 in digital assets. Currently, the U.S. government collects information from cryptocurrency exchanges and other institutions that serve as the on-ramps and off-ramps where people buy, sell, exchange, and store cryptocurrency. The updated law will impose reporting requirements on many other participants in the cryptocurrency ecosystem, from developers to traders to miners to end users. These participants will be required to collect sensitive identity details of the counterparties, securely handle that sensitive information, and turn it over to the government, or potentially face criminal penalties. This law will greatly expand the government's warrantless surveillance of sensitive financial information, including for transactions under $10,000, despite the fact that the law says it pertains only to transactions above that threshold. That's because the nature of public blockchains If the government knows the identity associated with the cryptocurrency wallet, then it knows the identity behind all transactions for that wallet, even though those transactions are far below $10,000. She argues that this violates the Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. The Fourth Amendment requires law enforcement to get a warrant supported by probable cause before conducting a search and seizure. Now, I can see where she's coming from. She ends up citing all of this jurisprudence and constitutional precedent from the Supreme Court. But this is why I think she's ultimately wrong. You know, she may claim to be a civil liberties attorney and a crypto attorney, but I was a prosecutor, all right? I dealt in the Fourth Amendment all of the time, prosecuting murderers, rapists, child molesters who would fight tooth and nail to argue Fourth Amendment protections, and then I would have to pretty much lay out why they were full of crap. In the sense that, okay, so if you are trying to do a search and seizure, you either need a warrant, like she said, or an exception. And there are all of these different exceptions to the warrant requirement of the Fourth Amendment. You know, one of them could be the plain sight doctrine. Another exception could be consent, or the automobile exception, or a Terry stop and frisk, or a search incident to lawful arrest. All of these exceptions are pretty much checks on an overtly broad warrant requirement. I think that one of the probably most probable or likely exceptions here that a court could apply would be consent. You know, by signing up for these centralized fiat on and off ramps, these exchanges, you know, you're engaged in consent. You are consenting to their terms of services. You are consenting to put your public information on a public blockchain. Not to mention the fact that when you eventually take it off, there's nothing stopping you from engaging in some sort of Tornado Cash style mixer or tumbling service that could then anonymize your data. So I don't know. I feel like this is just a bunch of saber rattling. I mean, not to mention that anytime the government or the court systems in general want to legitimize or legally justify something, I mean, they have the broad realm of jurisprudence which they use to justify things under the Commerce Clause in the United States, or the Necessary and Proper Clause, or even the Due Process Clause. You know, you have procedural and substantive due process, and I've seen those things pretty much be used to justify virtually anything under the sun. I mean, it's ridiculous the mental gymnastics some of these courts will go through in order to read into some of these clauses some BS that isn't otherwise related to the fact pattern at bar. So, I mean, what this attorney needs to understand is that, I mean, if the government wants to do this, they're going to find a way, you know, and reasonable minds can disagree, but I just think that it's one of those things. This is inevitable, just in my humble opinion here. I'd like to keep a tab on this and see how it goes. There's pretty much no doubt in my mind that there is going to be some sort of legal challenge from some group, I don't know, the ACLU or what have you, you know, one of these groups that likes to sue about everything, but we'll see how this all shapes up in the future. I'll keep you guys posted. Interesting. All right, next up we could see that the IMF urges El Salvador to discontinue Bitcoin's legal tender status. The global financial institution said Bitcoin's use as legal tender poses risks to the country's financial stability, integrity, and consumer protection. It states, the executive board of the International Monetary Fund recommended that El Salvador discontinue the use of Bitcoin as legal tender in the country due to the financial risks and liabilities created. The recommendation came in a report issued on Tuesday following bilateral discussions with El Salvador about its economy. El Salvador has been in negotiations with the IMF for a $1.3 billion loan. IMF directors, quote, stressed that there are large risks associated with the use of Bitcoin on financial stability, financial integrity, and consumer protection, as well as the associated fiscal contingent liabilities, according to the report. The director also urged authorities to narrow the scope of the Bitcoin law by removing Bitcoin's legal tender status. Some directors also expressed concern over the risks associated with issuing Bitcoin-backed bonds. In November, the IMF staff said Bitcoin should not be used as legal tender in El Salvador and urged the Central American country to strengthen the regulation and supervision of its newly established crypto payment ecosystem. El Salvador adopted Bitcoin as legal tender in September, and its president, Nayib Bukele, has become a vocal proponent of the cryptocurrency. The country has been accumulating Bitcoin and recently bought 410 more Bitcoins, reaching more than 1,500 Bitcoin held. El Salvador also plans to issue a $1 billion Bitcoin bond this year that will be a 10-year duration bond, and it's going to be US dollar denominated. Here we can see Nayib. And I think that this is interesting in the sense that, I mean, it's plain as day that the IMF and all of these TradFi institutions view Bitcoin as a direct threat to their hegemony over global financial markets and their ability to leverage traditional fiat and the dollar in order to control and manipulate all of these different geopolitical actors. So, I mean, it's a no-brainer that the IMF is trying to leverage this loan that El Salvador wants and try to get some sort of quid pro quo, like, hey, we'll give you the loan, but no more Bitcoin as legal tender. So I think that this Nayib Bukele guy, he seems pretty based. He's all up on Twitter with the laser eyes and everything. He just continues to buy the dip. I'm interested to see how this is all going to shape out in the future, whether or not he's going to kowtow and back down in order to get the loan, or whether or not he's going to stay steadfast and just stay the course of a pro-Bitcoin nation and keep it as legal tender. I really think that he'll probably end up doing that and stay the course of Bitcoin. So finally, we could see, we'll just wrap this up real quick. The New York Senate confirms a new top financial regulator. Adrienne Harris has run the NYDFS on an acting basis since her nomination. And this is pretty important because New York is pretty much the financial epicenter of the world, you know, housing Wall Street and all that. So a lot of what ends up shaping out on a larger economic stage has its roots in New York. So as we can see, they say the New York Department of Financial Services officially has a new head. The state Senate confirmed Adrienne Harris, a former federal official and professor, to run the Wall Street regulator on Tuesday. During a nomination hearing before the Senate Finance Committee on Monday, Harris said she hoped to bolster the regulator's BitLicense team to clear a backlog of applications for New York's landmark virtual currency license. Cryptocurrency is here to stay, but the risk of anti-money laundering, consumers, for cyber are incredibly high, so we need real rigor, Harris said. Harris said she wants the NYDFS to have more resources across the board to oversee crypto, fintech, and financial services at large. Crypto in particular is continually evolving, she said. It's quickly evolving. Even though we've had the BitLicense since 2015, it didn't account for things like stablecoins. There's always more we can do, Harris said. So I think it's good to see someone that actually has somewhat of a handle on crypto and digital assets, so they could actually embrace this new paradigm shift for what it is, and then hopefully regulate it intelligently and appropriately, you know, considering all the facts and information at their disposal, and, you know, take a progressive and informed approach on these issues. So that pretty much wraps it up for today. I know it was a pretty big news day. I hope you guys liked this content. As always, if you enjoyed it, please hit the like button down below. Please also subscribe to our channel. We'd very much appreciate that. You can follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @CryptoBitLaw. And with that said, I will see you guys in the next video.